by Dr. J. Haney, and then whatever topic you want in your name and whatever topic generally comes up, okay?
Okay.
So this is going to be African Americans in the cities, and we've got the first 6 minutes of background, that kind of information, and you know, just the same kind of information you've been getting. Primarily.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, I'm gonna try to keep my voice high.
I hear you.
Dr. Haynes, did TSU win their homecoming game?
Yeah.
They did?
Almost lost it.
I know.
Yeah, you know.
They did better than our MTSU.
Oh, they lost.
Oh.
It was a good game, though.
Yeah.
We played Vanderbilt this weekend.
Yeah, that's what I understand. We're at Vanderbilt Stadium.
Yeah, you play it there. It's their homecoming.
Okay, Doctor, you about ready?
I'm ready when y'all.
Yeah, I like your sociological information, man. That's a lot of good information.
Oh, yeah.
People can just listen to one of these 30 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. And get that. That's right. Hopefully they'll do
That's
it.
the purpose of doing
The whole thing,
when I
yeah.
first started.
That's right, I
Just
bet.
give them something to listen to, and
Yeah.
a little bit of it, and write it down and go over it and see. If you can go over and over and over this basic information, then you find out that a lot of other information start coming into it.
That's right.
You got to have something to start with. And so that's what I had some struggles dealing with this. You remember Dr. Banky?
Yes. Oh. Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah.
He didn't want you to do it. Isn't that something? Didn't want to see it as academic.
That's right.
That's crazy. That's the same thing.
Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is African Americans in the cities, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the economic, political, and social situations of African Americans in the various cities throughout the United States, Dr. EKSanford. And of course, Dr. Sanford, you've been with us on many occasions, and as a matter of fact, that's why we keep inviting you back, because you've got a lot of good sound kind of sociological information that you're able to somehow bring it out of the classroom and put it into a practical kind of setting.
Yes.
In terms of how we might be able to deal with it. And it's very informative and instructive, you see. And so before we get into African Americans in the cities, let's have you to give us some information in reference to your background, education, experience. You know what we do in reference to that. Do that.
Okay. Well, again, I'm Dr. EKSanford, and I really thank you again for being here today. I'm always enjoy it when I come. It's an excellent forum. I did my postdoc degree at State College, Pennsylvania, at Penn State, my doctorate degree at Howard University in Washington, D.C., which on today's topic, I would like to say that one of my specializations there was demography, which is looking at the demographic transition of how people may move from one location to another location. So I think it's very pertinent, as well as looking at issues related to crime and deviance within the larger urban areas of the United States, and how that manifested itself from an earlier period to the present. Prior to that, I worked with the national headquarters of the American Red Cross, where I was the evaluation specialist and doing HIV/AIDS education. We did the rollout of many programs that are still in existence here in America as well as abroad. I did my undergraduate and master's degree at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, and other work other places such as the University of Michigan at the Institute for Social Research, and as well as at UNC in Chapel Hill. And another person that was going to be very much related to today's topic, Dr. Gerard Linsky, on the development of human societies, as we move from an agrarian to an urban area.
Very good. And Dr. Sanford, this information has to do with some of the things that we're faced with today. While we might talk about an earlier period in American history, you have already indicated that it starts back here,
Yes,
with all of these groups coming together and how they lived and how they worked in the cities and et cetera. So before the end of this first segment, give us some statements in reference to the African American in the cities itself.
Okay. I would like to really be able to contextualize it in thinking in terms of migration. And let's first define it as forced migration from the 1500s to 1860. When you think in terms of people who were forced out of Africa into different places that we might use the term diaspora. And that would mean throughout the Caribbean and South America and of course here in North America. People were forced there. Other immigrants came, of course, to this United States, but not forced. They were willing to come to the United States of America. And so we can look at that as far as various waves as the first one, the forced migration, where you had about 360 years of African enslavement throughout the Caribbean and here in America before the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, with Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. And so that was one of the type of backdrops, if you will, and looking at how a group of people ended up in such large numbers of millions, say here in the United States. But forced migration was indeed the first type of demographic transition that took place for people of African descent to be here in such large numbers in America. Primarily, as you may very well know, we always talk about where people came. The first place was in the ports in South Carolina, where millions were brought in at that earlier time of this first wave of the migration.
And so this is the beginning of the African and the New World in a real sense. And I think you call it forced migration.
Yes.
And I think that might be politically correct when you call it forced migration, because you're talking about slavery.
I'm talking about slavery.
The international slave trade.
That's right.
That played a crucial part in terms of bringing a large number of individuals to North America, and especially, and I think you've already indicated all of the places. And so what we're going to do, we're going to take our first commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to give you an opportunity to develop some of the information in reference to Africans in the New World and Africans in the cities. And we'll be back very, very shortly, because I think that what you're dealing with now is just laying the foundation.
Absolutely.
The foundation looks quite solid in terms of the way that you've laid it. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
So then migrate into urban areas.
Okay,
that's what I'm trying to get at.
That's that second,
that's the second part.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. Yeah,
and then that last part.
This lady that wrote, I've read part of the book too, dealing with the migration of black folks from. What was?
I don't know. Carol Stack did one.
Of another son.
Yeah.
It's.
Native something. Not native.
No, it was. Contrasting Africans who worked in the sun and then go to the northern parts of the United States, but the economic situation was not different, so it was of another son or something. It's a very, very
good book.
Yeah, very popular book. You know, that I've read most of it, and I can't even think of the name of the author itself now. But it's all right. Yeah, this is a clip of information that we want you
Yes,
putting
yes,
it out.
definitely. Yeah, because I want to try to lay out how all these problems in urban areas exist today, but it was stemmed from what happened earlier. That's what people like to say, oh, that was back then, this is now. It's very important to make those connections.
Well, that's why I try to encourage people, people to use this information.
That's right.
Students, all the students have to do is just write down
that's right.
the essence of it, and
you
then
can't get them to do it today. You go crazy in the class. I just left.
Man.
You leave them. I came left the classroom.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is Africans in the New World, or African Americans in the cities. And we're fortunate to have with us Dr. EKSanford6 from Tennessee State University. And so, Dr. Sanford, let's pick up where we left off during this next 8 minutes. Okay. It'll give you an opportunity to sort of develop and to push us forward in terms of Africans in the New World and Africans in the cities.
Yes, so in the last segment, you were absolutely right. This forced migration was indeed the worst type of an enslavement that could have possibly happened in the human history of mankind, and that was this peculiar institution of enslavement. And so when we think about those 360 years from 1500 to 1860, then after the Civil War, you had a number of different changes that started to occur in the United States. And around about 1860 to 1870, you found some free African Americans starting to move west. But then what we refer to as the Great Migration started around 1916. And this is very important because people who were freed by this time and became a notion of still the vast majority of the population still living in the South and in agriculture. But there was a human development change that occurred from agriculture to industrialization. And so the boll weevil that ended up hurting the cotton in the South, and so people of African descent started to migrate for better lives, better conditions to migrate to the North. And so you found that places like Cleveland and surprisingly Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., that is endearingly called Chocolate City, all these other urban areas, or in New York and Harlem, all of these urban areas people moved to try to have better jobs in industrialized type of a country at this time. And as they moved there, they were hoping for a better life. And this is one of the primary reasons for moving from the South to the North. And when they went into these particular areas that became, as time went on, very much a part of urban problems. Economics became disastrous. This groups of people that migrated there came there with high hopes and in many instances prospered and did a lot better, but they had low-skilled types of jobs that they could finish a job and then go right out of that job and take on another one. So things were better. And I would also like to say during this time period of 1916 to say that first migration period to 1930, if we think about World War I and World War II, why there was a need there for people to build railroads because of the war, to build military equipment. So therefore industries evolved and there was a need for large numbers of people to work in those industries. So this workforce that moved there came there for those types of reasons. But on a more intellectual level, it is very interesting to understand because of that great migration, something by the name of the Harlem Renaissance emerged. And during this time period, you had people like Zora Neale Hurston, the great Duke Ellington, Count Basie, just many other literary scholars at that time, the great W.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, all of those people in this central area from that great migration emerged that really contributed to the American culture as well as the world culture. But now, given that, you had World War I, World War II, large concentrations of people moving from the South to the North, with an increase of millions by this time that have moved into urban areas. And after they got there and worked very hard, you find that discrimination was even there in the
Good,
North,
okay.
as they very much experienced sometimes in the South. People were disrespecting, weren't used to that group of people moving in, that group of people taking jobs that others felt that they should have. And when you think about today's political climate, some of the same issues are very much present with immigration of other people coming into the country, or with groups of people still competing for jobs and within the workforce. But this was a great migration that took place in that particular time period from 1916, say, to 1930, with large concentrations of African Americans moving. And then we can look at what we might refer to as a second wave of that same migration that went on from up until the 1960s through the 1970s. Again, with people moving from the South to the North in large population numbers. And that statistics just increased, and people were moving for a better way of life, and to also to prosper and to move away from a very depressed, offensive, racist society that they
side,
had
a
born in,
very,
and
very
the
violent
side
side at
yes.
the time.
Yes.
Well, since we're into a voting season now,
Yes.
how did African Americans participate in the politics
Yes.
once they got out of the South? Make some statements.
Well,
about
that's
that.
a very interesting concept, because historically, Africans who had an opportunity to vote would have probably voted in the Republican Party at that particular time. But then there was a transition that took place, after World War I, World War II, and things started to change, that people started to move toward a more democratic type of voting. And those types of possibilities, as they move to the North, lean in that direction. And I think that's why today you will find large numbers of people who are concentrated in urban areas will vote on the Democratic ticket, because they feel that their policies will gear toward them more so than what a more conservative Republican Party would. So they actually were indeed the Democratic Party. But they were a force to be reckoned with, and people had to go in, and many people started to merge into education, become Congress people out of those urban areas, and very politically motivated in that urban setting. But going back to that whole notion of them moving there, we would like to try to say that when we look at the culture of those concentrated urban areas, a lot of deviance started to emerge. Why? Because the economics within those particular cities did not allow people to continue, as we moved into a technological age, to have the same jobs that they had when they went there in an earlier time period of 1916 to the 1930s, or why they went there in the 50s and 60s in large proportions. So now we see pockets of cultural poverty within those same urban settings that would be disproportionate of African Americans in that area. So education, economics, school systems, family breakup, all of those characteristics that would lead toward high crime rates are certainly characteristics of a large number of the urban areas. And then this become a very huge problem within the United States. So when we look at Chicago and look at other urban areas, we see homicide rates are so high. It's not that it's the people, but it's the social environment of living in the culture of poverty and those characteristics that it has manifested that will cause that to happen.
Okay, and we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
In the South, because of the early migration, are now moving back to the
Okay.
South.
And in the meanwhile, say something about the system of separation and segregation.
Oh, yes, yes.
In the South, it was
Yes.
clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's the law, et
Yeah,
cetera, et
yeah,
cetera,
yeah.
Plessy versus
Yeah, yeah.
Ferguson.
That's right.
But in the North, it was not always that
Yes.
way, and how that might have contributed.
Okay, yes,
the separation of only black folks
Yeah.
here,
In
et
the-
cetera.
yeah,
Do
okay.
something
All right, I
like
get that too. Yeah.
Because I think that would sort of round out.
That's right,
This
it would.
excellent information.
Okay.
You've got them there.
That's right.
And they're working, and they're going to war and everything else, and et cetera. But while they're there, everything is not equal in a
That's
real
right.
sense. And this is
Absolutely.
where the suffrage plays
Absolutely.
a very, very important part. And some of the things that we ought to be thinking about today
That's right.
in terms of trying to deal with this politic. Okay, but that's essentially, yeah.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
have 10 minutes. And
Okay,
so
yes,
anything
that's
that you want
fine.
to throw within
Okay.
the framework of making people understand the violence, brutality, and et
Okay.
cetera in the northern parts of it, sociologically.
Okay,
Yeah, just
absolutely.
throw it at us. You see.
Okay.
I'm trying to know that lady's name.
Yeah,
It starts
I
with
hear
an N. She did this tremendous study on Africans, the
Great
migration of black folks to the northern parts of the United States was on all of the. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to Africans in the cities. And let's pick up where we left off, Dr. Sanford, and have you to talk about some aspects of separation and segregation and some of the other things that you like to deal with during this last 10 minutes of Africans in the cities.
Okay. Well, and as we look back historically and coming out of slavery with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, there were rules and regulations and actually laws that were put in place that were legal segregate people in the South. Mm-hmm. And this was very much a part of the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson that made everything legal to be separated. And we know out of slavery through Jim Crow laws for 81 years, things were separate with unwritten laws that made things segregated here in the South. So when people made that great migration to the northern areas, they really moved to try to have a certain freedom, opportunity, and as we mentioned in the last segment, job opportunities to work in industries. But as they got there and increasing numbers became, we make a distinction in sociology between overt type of racism and segregation, where laws are there to say that, and then covert. And those things that are overt are pretty much legalized. They are there, and you kind of know your position. But when it's covert, it's beneath the surface. It's not so much written in law. But people might still act in very prejudiced, racist, and discriminatory ways. So we can find that was starting to emerge in the northern cities. Although African Americans migrated and went into the urban areas and they were pretty much concentrated in one area, if they would go out to get jobs eventually, they found a lot of discrimination. Or in many instances, they may have been discriminated against going into other areas to have upward mobility and housing. You can see even within this campaign, one of the presidential candidates discriminated against African Americans to live in their apartment complex. And so this type of racism and prejudice was very much a part of the North as well as in the South, but there was this subtle difference that was there. But it was indeed present, and it was discriminatory toward African Americans that treated them in such an inequitable way that it not allowed them to advance within that area as others could and live freely. But it was much better than living in the South. But there were still great problems that were there.
And so, and you often talk about the sociological impact in terms of how Africans lived and some of the struggles that they had to overcome. Talk in reference to some of those things.
Well, that's a peculiar institution going back from slavery all the way. It was horrible. Institutions that are so important were just broken up. People doing that first forced migration, of course, families were destroyed, laws saying that you can't learn, didn't have medical care, housing was awful. You know, if you watch any of the film that are out here today, 12 Years of Slave, which is kind of interesting just to bring that up, a person that had migrated to the North and was just doing his work and then got captured and pulled back into South, and it was a person that was enslaved there, because there were free African Americans even during the earlier time periods before the Great Migration, and some even as early as say 1860 to 1870 went west. They were free African Americans, and some of those same free African Americans went to the north, but many went out west into the California area. But it was kind of an interesting phenomenon to see that they still had to experience this indifferent treatment. But that enslavement was just a horrible thing when you look at things that are going on today, because culture is defined as knowledge, customs, language, values that are passed down from one generation to the next generation. So if you think in terms of 244 years of enslavement, 81 years of Jim Crow laws that led into legal segregation, how could one group fare in an equal way or balanced way in a society that says you're supposed to have education, economic opportunity, but you have forced desegregation and racism that prevents that. And now those born in the 80s and 90s might feel that there's a sense of, oh, everything is just fine now. However, there are some still connections that are going on with what happened from 1619 to the present, within many of the environments and families that are present today. We still have a disproportionate amount of people in very high percentages the first time of graduating from high school and college. You know, first generation still today. Why? Because of the culture here in America and how it was founded. Alex de Tocqueville, for instance, he came here during the time of slavery and was quite surprised. He came here to look at our penal system. And when he came here to look at this prison system that they felt in comparison to the old world was much better, he was quite surprised because he saw people who were enslaved. Enslavement was still present. The old world had slavery going on, but they got out of it. But America was still doing it. And he felt that we would never reach a true democracy because of the very foundations, the pillars of our institutions were based on slavery. So he, in his book, Democracy in America, his central thesis is saying that we will never reach a true democracy because of how it was founded.
How it started.
How it started.
Very good. You know,
Yes.
in terms of trying to move toward that, we've got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Let's say something in terms of the efforts that were made by Africans to improve themselves. You know, NAACP, the Arab League, and etc. It didn't go. They didn't go so very far, but at least it helped to stem some of the tides in reference to this discrimination. Speak to some of those.
Well, the great Dr. W.B. Du Bois and others founded the NAACP, and this was the great Niagara movement, where they founded there. A lot of other European